dapat stricto tayo. This is a convict that we are allowing to possess firearms, Mr.
Right.
President. So kaya, let us not make it 6 years, masyado naman. So 2 years, okay na po yun.
Yeah, okay.
Lesson mo, dapat nga i-lesson pa. Kung tutusin. If you're a convict, you are not allowed to own firearms. Dapat. We will assume that we are recognizing. Mr. President, ito yung requirements ata that may declaration si applicant that sasabihin ni applicant that I have not been convicted of a crime punishable by more than 2 years. So, dapat stricto tayo. This is a convict that we are allowing to possess firearms, Mr.
Right.
President. So kaya, let us not make it 6 years, masyado naman. So 2 years, okay na po yun.
Yeah, okay.
Lesson mo, dapat nga i-lesson pa. Kung tutusin. If you're a convict, you are not allowed to own firearms. Dapat.
Yeah.
Pero ito, parang may concession na 2 years. So that's the current state of the law, Mr. President. So I will discourage being more lenient, Mr. President, to the convict. Thank you.
We have the intention of amending this
Convict.
particular provision, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President, can we continue with page 2?
Yes, please proceed.
Senator Subiri has some amendments on page 2.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I may, on page 2, section 3, on line 29, after the word business, Mr. President, delete the line, provided that such permit shall be valid for 2 years from the date of the approval of the application unless sooner revoked or suspended, and will be replaced with, provided that such permit shall be valid for 2 years, 5 years, 2, 5, or 10 years, as the case may be, depending on the term of the corresponding LTOP, unless sooner revoked or suspended. So, ang punto dyan, Mr. President, is that the PNP chief can issue a permit to carry. Right now, by law, it's only 2 years. But he can make it 2 years, he can make it 5 years, he can make it 10 years. The reason being, is, for example, you're a retired judge. You're 65 or 70 years old. I think the retired judge is 70 years old. He may apply for a 10-year permit to carry. Para naman, hindi naman sa every 2 years magbabalik sa chief of police kasi anyway, he's qualified being a retired judge and maybe his life will continuously be in danger, specify he handles high-profile cases. Yun lamang po, Mr. President. Maybe, if I ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President, I just want to clarify something.
Session suspended.
It's, page 2, section 3, line 29, after the word business.
All right.
It will be read, and we will delete. We will delete the line that says, provided that such permit shall be valid for 2 years from the date of the approval of the application, unless sooner revoked or suspended, to be replaced with, provided that such permit shall be valid for 2 or 5 years, unless sooner revoked or suspended.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. My next amendment, Mr. President, is on page, anong page ito? Page 4 pa, page 5 pa, Mr. President. Are there any amendments prior to that?
Before you proceed, Senator Zubiri, just on page 3, just would like to ask the sponsor, on page 3, line 28, reservists under Republic Act number 7077. May I know how many reservists are there?
May number ko?
Are we going to legalize giving them firearms?
Di po, Mr. President, if I may explain. It is only, sige po. It is only threat assessment. They're only exempted from threat assessment.
Yes,
Kasi-
but how many reservists are there? I just would like to know the numbers, Your Honor.
We have a general, Mr. President, of the reservist corps here. General Tolentino, Mr. President. May we recognize him?
Mr.
Yes, Majority Leader.
From my recollection, I think it's 170,000.
170,000.
More or less. More or less.
How can the special unit of PNP assess these 170,000?
No, these are, you know, when you speak of reservists, this would include retirees of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, former ROTC cadets join the ranks of the reservists. Because under existing AFP mandates, once you have served, General Angan is nodding his head, you're considered as a reservist once you have retired. So automatically, and Mr. President, to underscore the point, retirees have been vetted. They're not just well-trained, they know how to use the firearm, and they're responsible gun holders as well. So this would probably lessen the administrative burden of any agency, the firearms office in charge of vetting all of this prospective gun holders, Mr. President.
Thank you for the information, Majority Leader. What about on line 26? The active, honorably separated, and retired military and law enforcement personnel, are they not considered as a reservists?
I think, Mr. President, the law kasi was very clear. The original law, it said active and retired military and law enforcement personnel. I think what they added here is honorably separated, just to highlight those that are dishonorably discharged, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
but according to the Majority Leader, itong mga retired military officers are also
Yes.
classified under the reservists.
I think
correct?
it's better to distinguish them separately, Mr. President. Yung may retired military and police personnel.
Yes.
Kasi yung may reservist, katulad ko po, ako po yung reservist.
Yes.
Senator Robin Padilla is a reservist. Marami po tayong reservist. You're also a reservist, Mr. President.
Not yet.
Oh, malapit na. Oh, dapat, Mr. President, you're the chairman of the committee on
There are a
defense.
lot of members of the showbiz industry who are also
Service.
reservists
Yes.
in the military.
Mr. President, if I may, not all retired AFP or PNP personnel are automatically become members of the reserve force. They have to join, they have to manifest their intention, they have to officially register their names. May mga proseso po yan, Mr. President, na may process na ginagawa. So right now,
So, based
you
on-
are asking about the total number of reservists.
Based on your data, how many, just give me a
It's
ballpark
about
figure.
1.2 million, Mr. President.
1.2 million.
Yes, Mr. President. According to that data from DND.
Pero, Mr. President, if I may, Mr. President, just to explain, I understand your point. Parang 1.2 million, bibigyan natin ng baril. Hindi po, sir. Hindi automatic na bibigyan sila ng baril, Mr. President.
Dadapas sa mga
It's just a
procedures,
threat assessment.
Yes. Yes, I understand.
It's just exemption from threat assessment because of the reason being that if you're a reservist, you have to be called to duty in times of a national crisis or an invasion and perform your duty as a reservist. Ang nangyari po I'll give you an example, Mr. President. Ang nangyari po sa Israel, lahat po sila ay trained. Men and women are trained as ex-military. But the government required all their firearms to be placed in the camps. So pagpasok po ng Hamas dun sa kanila, lahat sila anti-terrorism experts pero dala nila kutsilyo lang. Yung kalaban nila naka AK-47. Kaya ang daming 1,400 Israelis perished at the time and they're all trained individuals. Ang punto lang po nitong batas na ito is that our reservists may buy a firearm and they're exempted because they're reservists, they have no conviction, exempted na sila sa sa certificate of threat assessment. Yun lamang po, it's just being an advantage that you serve as a reservist, at least you're exempted from getting the threat assessment. Kasi you're going to defend the country if called for, Mr. President.
Thank you for the clarification,
Thank you, sir.
Senator Zubiri. Senator De La Rosa, you said that there are 1.2 million reservists.
Yes, Mr. President.
Ang sinabi ni what the majority leaders mentioned is only 170,000. Where did
They are classified, Mr. President, according to the following. We have ready reserve, standby reserve, and affiliated reserve. So for ready reserve, we have 71,000.
what is this?
Ready reserve.
Ready reserve.
Mobilizable at any given, at any point in time.
Range ng edad nito.
Ang edad dito is
Kung ready sila, meron bang 70?
18 to 35 years old.
18 to 35, all right?
Yes. Then we have the standby reserve.
This,
Standby reserve.
standby,
Medyo mas matanda ito konti. Above 35 at below 56 years old.
ako yun.
Below 65.
Standby reserve, after that,
That's 1.1 million, Mr. President.
standby reserve is 1.1
1.1 million.
million.
Yes.
Ang age bracket nito, 35 to 65?
36 to 65.
Alright.
Then we have affiliated reserve, which is 15,000.
What do you mean by affiliated reserve?
Companies that
These are members of companies that
reserve force.
that were
Join the reserve force.
who joined the reserve force.
Ilan po yan?
15,000, Mr. President.
Pero walang age bracket yan.
Walang age bracket ito.
Walang age bracket yan.
Parang mga technical service ito. May
Yes.
mga pare,
Mga
doktor,
professionals.
professionals ito. Piloto. So, mga professional ito, Mr. President.
Alright. So, dun sa age bracket na 35 to 65, halos lahat ba yan? Yung mga reservists na tinutukoy ni Senator, yung Majority Floor Leader, yung mga retired military officers who are members also of the, nakalagay ito, which is classified under the reservists under Republic Act 7077, are the majority of the, are still alive? Okay pa ba yung mga yun?
Yes, because they're accounted every year. So, kung nandito nakasabi 1.1 million,
Is that your
abay,
latest?
ito lahat.
Is that your latest data, Senator Del Rosa?
From DND, Mr. President.
Yeah, is that the latest data from the department?
Latest, Mr. President, latest.
When is the latest? Last year or this year?
Kailan to?
Last week.
Last year, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you for the clarification, Senator Del Rosa. Senator Subiri, you still have some amendments?
Thank you, sir. If there's no amendments,
Yeah, Mr. President, if I may,
Yes, Mr.
before the amendment of the Senator Subiri, still on page 5. Still on page 3. On page 3, also on line 20, delete the word medical and replace it with the word health. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can now entertain the
Thank you,
amendments
Mr.
of Senator Subiri.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with your permission, and my dear colleague, Senator Bato, page 4 po tayo. Sa page 4, section 5. Your Honor, line 6.
Line 6?
Line 6.
6 or 28?
Sorry.
Section
1 second po. 1 second.
Line 28.
Page 4. Ano to? Ano to? Ito.
Sir, bale, page 5. Yeah.
Sorry, page 5 po. Page 5. My apologies. Page 5, line 6.
All right.
On page 5, line 6, after the word manufacturer,
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
if I may,
yes, yes, yes.
Wait, i-ano yung source.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Are you on the same frequency?
Ito kasi yung ano po.
I hope.
Session suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on page 5, line 6, after the word manufacturer, insert a comma and the phrase new licenses to import. I so move, Mr. President.
And new licenses to
Yes,
import.
and new licenses to import.
Are you going to delete the phrase to deal including?
Hindi, ano po, dagdag lang to, manufacturer. We insert the comma on line 6, so it will read as follows: new licenses to manufacture, comma, new licenses to import, comma, and new license to deal.
All right. To deal.
So nagdagdag pula tayo ng isang line.
Is there an objection? What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Thank
There
you,
being none, the amendment is approved.
So President, the same page, section, line 9 after the word manufacture is also the same. Insert a comma and the phrase license to import, comma. So moves, President.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
On the same page as well, section 5, line 10, after the word manufacture, Mr. President.
Same.
Insert a comma is the same, license to import, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Accepted?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. On the same page and section after line 28, Mr. President, we'll insert a new paragraph. And this paragraph
Same
is...
page?
Yes, sir. And this paragraph is actually in compliance of our ease of doing business, Mr. President, na law, which I had the honor of sponsoring once upon a time in my first, my comebacking term in 2016. And it will read as follows, Mr. President. Issuance of permits, licenses, and certifications shall strictly adhere to the period provided for under Republic Act 11032 or the Ease of Doing Business and Efficiency Government Service Delivery Act of 2018. Period. In addition to this, comma, the approving authority shall issue a temporary license to operate in favor of the applicant upon approval of the specifications and plans of the manufacturing facility, comma, shooting range or dealership to be constructed, period. The approving authority is prohibited from ordering to change, comma, renovate or modify a newly built manufacturing facility / shooting range / dealership or a portion thereof if the construction of the same had strictly followed the building and construction plans submitted to and approved, period. Such changes shall be made prior to the issuance of the building permit and the actual construction of the facility. I so move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, the amendments approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Still on the same page, in section, line 32, after the word guidelines and the punctuation period, insert the following proviso. Provided that such approving authority shall strictly observe the classification of weapons and their corresponding requirements and restrictions as provided in this act, period. Provided further, that in no case shall the approving authority prohibit or limit the manufacture, importation, or dealing in firearms that are authorized or registrable under this act. I so move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Page 10, if there are any other amendments prior to page 10.
No other amendments on page 6 to 9? Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, sir. On page 10, section 9, line 8, after the word sale, insert a comma and the word transfer, Mr. President. So,
What does the
sale or
sponsor say?
transfer.
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On the same page in section, line 16, after the word elections, a new proviso shall read as follows. Provided further that firearms of active military and police, including their personal firearms, are exempt from Comelec authority to transport. I so move, Mr. President. And the reason being is, we're disarming, oh yes, Mr. President, so we just don't want to disarm our active personnel.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. And my last, I believe this is my last, just the last page of the amendments. Still on page 10, section 9, line 29, delete the word countrywide, Mr. President. I so move.
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 10, section 9, line 31, after the word declared, insert the phrase during a state of emergency or state of calamity and approved by the President. I so move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? There being none, amendments approved.
And then my last amendment, Mr. President, on page 11, line 1, insert the new section 10 to read as follows. Section 10, transfer of firearms. A licensed firearm holder, prior to the effectivity of this act, who is no longer interested to continue processing his/her licensed firearm, may transfer the same to a licensed holder or licensed juridical entity subject to the provisions of this act. In case of death or legal incapacity of an LTAP holder, the ownership of any registered firearms may be transferred to the holder's designated next of kin indicated in the license within 6 months from the date of death. provided that the next of kin shall secure an LTAP and transfer the registration of such firearm in his or her name in accordance with the provisions of this act. And the reason for that, Mr. President, is there are parents who have firearms. They die, unfortunately, I just had a friend who lost his life, a classmate of mine over the weekend. Meron siyang 10 baril. Under the law, apparently, you have to surrender those to the PNP. It goes to the PNP. But sana naman the next of kin, the children, the son or the daughter would, if they want the firearms, they can apply for an LTAP and this can be transferred to them. Mr. President, yun ang malaga dito.
As long as they are
As long as
qualified.
dumaan sila sa LTAP process.
They are qualified.
Yes, under the provisions of this act.
Yeah, because we consider this as personal property, Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir.
Ang mahal ng bili mo niyan, pagkatapos, hindi mo lang maipasa doon sa mga anak mo na, ako,
Opo.
may anak ako na pulis.
Opo.
Dapat ipasa ko sa anak ko na pulis yung baril ko pag ako'y papanaw na sa mundo nito.
Yes, sir. Because the previous law, Mr. President, did not have that, did not see that complication. So if the good sponsor will accept the.
May I interject, Mr. President?
Before we act on the motion, yes, Senator Pia.
So I was waiting for this. I didn't know that His Honor had an amendment. And then as he read it, I didn't catch it, but then you explained it. So let me just repeat if I understand it correctly. The proposal now is to include a provision wherein if a registered firearms owner passes away, his heirs may go through the proper process of getting their own accreditation or registration, and if they get it, they may then continue to possess. And there was a timeline. Was it 6 months?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. The firearm may be transferred to the holders designated next of kin indicated in the license within 6 months from the date of death.
Okay, so I do have a question before I won't have to make any amendment to the amendment. The original license holder, I assume, either has a license because he is his line of work requires that he carries the firearms, or like some of our colleagues here, like His Honor is an enthusiast, likes to use it as for a sport or for whatever other legitimate purpose. So the passion is there. I noted in the bill that there's also a provision that allows, I think that was also an amendment, that the firearm owners, registered owners, to also carry a certain amount of ammunition, right? I saw that. So my concern is this, if the firearms on their own have value, and what heir in their right mind wouldn't want to inherit something with value? Pwede naman ibenta or maybe sentimental value. Pero wala silang passion doon. Di ba yan ang mga possibilities na magkaroon ng a disaster waiting to happen kasi nandyan lang yung mga baril, tapos may ammunition pa dyan kasi wala siyang passion katulad nung original owner. So how do you address that?
Well,
I'm just curious.
As a matter of policy, the firearms should be confiscated by the PNP. It has to be returned to the custody of the Philippine National Police. Kung walang interesado mag-inherit sa property na yan.
Hindi, ang concern ko, Mr. President, they may go through the process of applying, and kung wala naman silang record nga na criminal record, what proof do they have to show na aalagaan nila yung baril na yan, na hindi yan magamit ng mga ibang tao sa bahay nila, hindi nakabalandra dyan yung mga ammunition na baka magkaroon ng accident waiting to happen.
Mayroon man tayong requirement, Mr. President, na all firearms must be placed in a bolt.
Saka, Mr. President,
Safety bolt doon sa
So itong new
Mechanic
owner,
address,
okay, so
yung
that new
firearms.
owner,
Under the law.
let's say, hindi naman pinamana sa kanya yung bahay. Pinamana lang yung firearm. So dun sa bagong bahay niya,
That will form part in the
registration process.
inspection
Ah,
to be made by the PNP.
Na nandyan yung-
Pamuntahan ka ng PNP. Hala, saan itong baril na gusto mong i-inherit from your dead father?
Okay.
So, ito sir, saan yung kwan mo, yung bolt? Wala akong board, sir, kasi ang board nandun sa bahay ng tatay ko.
Oo nga.
Ayun, not
Ate.
qualified to inherit.
Okay.
That's a
Also, Mr. President,
requirement.
That's a requirement, Mr.
Plus
President.
gun safety seminar.
Gun safety seminar.
Gun safety
I was about to
seminar.
add to Senator Bato. We cannot own a firearm, Ma'am Madam Pia, if we don't train. We have to go through basic firearm seminar. And
Okay.
also to pay for the LTOP, kasi ano yan, may type 1, type 2. Ako type 5 collector, type 5 din si Senator Patos, type 5 din si Senator Robin. Mahal yan. You have to pay for every firearm, and the license alone is expensive. Then every firearm has its own firearms permit, yung ownership of the firearm card. That alone, if you're a civilian, costs about 1,000 plus yata per firearm.
Ang mura
Kasi
naman nun. Pwede bang taasan nyo?
1,500 yata. Pero kasi if you have 10 firearms, it's 15,000 eh.
A
Magkano?
year?
2,200.
2,200.
A
Yes,
year?
per year. So, mahal po siya. So, as you're saying, if the guy has no passion or the girl has no passion, it's a hassle for them.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's a
So, okay. So then my next question is, if they decide na aminin niya, alam mo, wala talagang passion, di ba, magsiseminar pa ako, magawa pa ako ng vote, okay, wala akong passion. How do they dispose
They
of
have
that?
to
What is the
surrender
proper...
to the PNP po,
Okay.
all the firearms.
But so the value of that inheritance is lost to them?
Parang ganun.
Baka you can address that. Kasi it is not, in raising this issue, my first concern is safety.
Yeah.
But secondly, I don't want now the heir to feel obligated to accept that an inheritance just because, sayang ba't ko susurrender to, sayang naman.
Yes.
So di ba natin maisipan ng paraan ngayon yan na payagan na ibenta yan under the
existing
licensed firearm owners?
under the existing law, that we are not touching this particular provision. Section 26, death or disability of licensee. Upon the death of legal disability of the holder of a firearm license, it shall be the duty of his or her next of kin, nearest relative, legal representative, or other person who shall knowingly come into possession of such firearm or ammunition to deliver the same to the FEO of the PNP or Police Regional Office, and such firearms or ammunition shall be retained by the police custodian pending the issuance of a license and its registration in accordance with this act. The failure to deliver the firearm or ammunition within 6 months after the death or legal disability of the licensee shall render the possession liable for illegal possession of firearm. So kung wala siyang passion, wala siyang interest na i-inherit yung baril, surrender niya sa PNP.
Kaya po mayroon tayong section 10 na bago for those who want to apply for it.
For the heirs who
For
want
the
to apply.
heirs, yes.
So, question, forget first about the owner dying. If a capable, healthy owner without any other reason other than, you know what, I'm a gun collector and I changed my mind, I don't want these guns anymore, you're allowed to sell it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're alive, Madam Mr. President.
That's my point. Why can't you allow his heirs to sell it? I don't see the difference. Because ang worry ko pa nga is they'll keep it. Because sentimental value to, tapos nawala na nga yung tatay ko, tapos pag hindi ako nag-apply, yung value nito, wala na rin sa amin kasi required by law to surrender. Why don't you give them a reasonable amount of time to sell it to other legitimate owners when he was alive, he could sell it?
Kasi, Mr. President, I think like real property, the DOAS, the deed of absolute sale, has to be a living person, di ba? I don't think pag namatay ng heirs,
No, it becomes the property of the estate.
yes.
So the estate can sell.
That's true.
So you can deposit. Anyway, I am not a gun expert. I am just thinking that it is detrimental to safety if it's kept in the position of someone who's not really passionate. But human nature, kunyari may sing-sing yung mga nanay ko, tapos sabi na, you can keep that PIA if you will keep it well or you will wear it all the time. If you're not going to wear it, you have to surrender it. Ayoko naman magsuot araw-araw, pero ano, isusurrender ko to, sa nanay ko to. I'm keeping it. Tapos, delikado. Why don't you think of a solution to that? I give them the estate should always be allowed to sell.
Say, I think, Mr. President, the proper procedures, the LTAP holder will sell to another LTAP holder. The problem is that if the LTAP holder dies, that's why we're coming up with solutions now.
Yeah.
And
but
I think the children.
that is my recommendation. If you want to take a minute, I don't think you're going to lose anything that you talk about, but from a legal perspective, the estate, and the estate is now the owner of all those properties. When
Maybe, Mr. President, we could sit down on it now, suspend for 10 minutes and this.